The biggest thing that differentiates a Unitarian Universalist church from almost any other religious body, I'm sure there may be others out there that I'm not aware of, but we are bound together as a community, not by a creed or a central belief. So what does bind us together, people will ask, across all these differences? And it's a covenant. And anybody who is willing to accept the covenant of the congregation, this agreement, they're welcome. So if they believe in God, or they don't believe in God, or they believe in reincarnation after you die, or heaven, or that you just go back into the elements of the earth, any of those beliefs, those don't distinguish us as a community. We always start by saying love is the spirit of this church, or love is the spirit of this congregation, and then service is its law. So in the sense that we don't have a law like the Torah's not our law, the Quran, or no scripture is our law. The only law that we have, so to speak, is that we're going to live our lives in some way more than just for ourselves individually. And then our covenant is to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. So if you can agree with those three things, seeking the truth in love, dwelling together in peace, and helping one another with this group of people, then you're welcome.
Hello. Welcome to Emotional Badass, where Moxie meets mindful. I'm your host, life coach, and psychotherapist, Nikki Eisenhauer. And on today's show, I'm interviewing Reverend Dr. Marlin Lavanhar, where we discuss Unitarian Universalism, personal spiritual journeys, and how these elements foster resilience and healing from trauma and religious wounds. Remember to find Emotional Badass wherever you get your podcasts. Please, if you are enjoying these videos, help support our channel and help support this content getting spread by the algorithm by hitting that like and subscribe button. Thank you for sharing this content with anybody that you think would like it and resonate. Reverend Dr. Marlin Lavanhar is a minister, artist, and activist. For the past 24 years, he has been the senior minister at All Souls Unitarian Church in Tulsa, which is the largest Unitarian Universalist church in North America with 2,000 members. I want to thank him for coming on Emotional Badass, and I hope y'all enjoy the interview. On to the show. Welcome, Dr. Marlin Lavanhar. I am so excited to have you. Thank you for agreeing to come on Emotional Badass.
Oh, this is such a pleasure. I'm really excited to be in conversation with you today.
Well, I want to tell our audience a little bit about how we met you, how we found you. And it was peak 2020. And my husband, Chris, who is the producer of the show, was setting up our podcast and doing all the tech that I don't understand. And some kind of way, something glitched, something got crossed in the matrix. And instead of our podcast episode being connected on our feed, it was one of your podcast episodes at the peak of 2020. And I was very, very stressed. I was about a year and a half into doing the podcast. I had no idea what was going to happen in the world when I took that on. I had almost everyone I had ever worked with flock back to me to work with me during the pandemic. I was very, very, very busy. I was scared, just like everybody else was. And your sermons were such a grounding, I'm going to choke up already. We're such a grounding force. And in listening to you in subsequent years, we resonate on so many things. I can hear the stoicism in your philosophies. I was just listening to you reference Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is one of my favorites, like just one of my absolute heroes. You were talking about choice and empowerment. You have been, I want to look at your bio and get it right. You have had quite the life experience. And I think that's part of what makes you a rich person to listen to, because I can hear all of that life experience. You are currently, and have been for the past 24 years, the senior minister at All Souls Unitarian Church in Tulsa, which is the largest Unitarian Universalist church in North America with 2,000 members. The congregation is fully affirming of LGBTQ. has high diversity and multicultural leadership and membership. Your wife is Anitra. You have a son and a daughter. You have degrees from Tulane and Harvard Divinity School, as well as an honorary doctorate from Phillips Theological School in Meadville, Lombard Seminary. You have done so much. I want to start with you on how you got into this role. How did you get into this role? How do you have a life and become a minister?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you. What a wonderful introduction. I was raised Unitarian Universalist as a child. My father was raised Jewish, and my mother was raised Catholic. They were married in the late 50s, and they looked for a place where could they go where their children could learn positive things about both Judaism and Christianity, but also learn about the world's religions and get a kind of open perspective so that they could make up their own minds as we grew. And they found the Unitarian Universalist Church. And I was raised outside of Chicago in a North Shore Unitarian church there. And it was a great experience. Now, like many teenagers, young adults, I drifted away as I went to college and started to kind of find my own way and explore different kinds of spiritualities and no spirituality, and made some life choices and mistakes and all that kind of stuff that young people tend to do. And then I ended up, after I graduated from Tulane, I went to Japan and lived in Japan for 2 years. And it was early 90s. I learned about Buddhism and Japanese culture, and just living away from the United States for a couple of years was very influential to me spiritually and personally. Then I spent 3 years with a friend bicycling around the world on mountain bikes. And so we spent most of that time about 2 years in Asia, just crossing China, Tibet, Nepal, India, all these places, Vietnam and Thailand, and then bicycled through Eastern Europe and through the Middle East into Israel, and then eventually came back and bicycled across North America. So I spent 3 years on a mountain bike, living a kind of nomadic life. But in that time, I found myself gravitating towards religious leaders, and so I went to retreat centers and ashrams and monasteries, and I did 1 week, 2 week retreats at different places. I went to study in a yeshiva in Israel, which is a Jewish place of learning. So I really found myself gravitating towards religious life. So that brought me back to Unitarian Universalism. To complete my answer to your question, eventually I find myself this young adult. I've had all this adventure. It's time for me to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And I realized I'm interested in religion, and where else could I go where I would not only be accepted, but encouraged to draw from Buddhism and Hinduism and different Judaism and different kinds of religious spiritualities, and be able to be a religious leader and somebody who could lead a community or be a leader within a community. And so that's what got me into the ministry.
That's such a rich background. And I think that's so important because it comes through in your teachings. I come from a background, and I help a lot of my clients. I'm a trauma therapist for almost 20 years. I have helped probably more people leave religion, but I have helped people find it and go into it also. Sometimes that surprises people. I grew up, a big part of my story is I was sexually abused in the home, and I put my father in prison as a young adult. He actually got out this year. For me, in my youth, I had such an aversion to even hearing the word God for a long time, because what I grew up and saw, my mother worked for a church. My abuser's father was a pastor in a church. What I saw was so much hypocrisy, and I saw so much that was religion used to twist and to manipulate and to control. For me, it's been quite a journey to even make peace with the word God, and then what a God is to me. What is that energy? Do I give myself permission to explore and take from all sorts of religions? It's part of why I've been drawn to Unitarian churches at different points in my life, because I so appreciate the maybe it's a universal principle, universe church, right? It's a universal principle of you count, you matter, you're allowed to explore. I think that was hard for me growing up Catholic in New Orleans. That exploration was not allowed. It was part of the teachings. All you were allowed to do was go to that Catholic church. You weren't allowed other teachings. And I think the limitation of that was really, really hard for me. I know a lot of clients listening right now have that kind of aversion. They have felt more violated than I think held by God, religion, spirit. What would you say to people listening that are having that kind of struggle?
Yeah, first of all, I'm just so thankful to you that you're so open about your story. Just because to be able to talk about what you went through and how you dealt with that and how you found ways to, live this life where you're giving back so much to people. Often people will ask me, they'll come to me and they'll say, Marlin, I'm trying to find, what is my purpose in life? And, people go through these crises and different things. And often I'll ask them, can you think of it where your heart has been broken? Because often I find that where somebody's heart's been broken, that there is an incredible passion and a lot of energy in that, where that break is. And often that leads people, that can drive people to go out into the world and make a real difference and to find, wow, I'm called to do this. I want to make sure no other young people go through what I went through, or if they do, that they have loving resources. And so people can be very driven by those places where our hearts were broken. And I think you're a great example of that and your story. And it's so painful to hear it. And it's so important that you share it, because so many people, I feel like, end up living, in the shadows with their stories that they're afraid to tell people. I think that there's a lot of church trauma and religious trauma out there. We actually have programs, classes, and things around this. We have a recovering from fundamentalism class for people who've been raised in a very fundamentalist religious background, and then other courses about religious trauma. So just last week we had a specialist come in, somebody like you who has trauma as a background, who does this professionally, and they on Wednesday night met with a group of us, and we got to share stories and hear about how religious trauma is a form of trauma, how it's the same as lots of other kinds of trauma, and what makes it different, and how people can work with that. So it's something that we're very aware of, because a lot of people come to us after feeling pushed away from another church, maybe because they didn't believe exactly how people believed, or they were shunned, or because they were female and weren't given, they weren't seen for all of who they are, LGBT. So there's lots of things like that. But I want to tell you a story if I can.
Oh, please.
I'm meeting right now. I've been meeting this past week with our 9th grade class, and that's our coming of age class. It's a year where they sort of transition from being children to adolescence, and it's a rite of passage. So it would be like bar mitzvah in the Jewish tradition, or communion in a many Christian, not communion, confirmation in many Christian churches. So that's what we call it, coming of age. And I've been working with them, and these young people they share their credo. They've been working all year on what do you believe, because they've been growing up in Sunday school, learning about lots of other religions and lots of other ways people answer the big questions of life. But in 9th grade, we say, okay, now it's time for you to start thinking, what do you believe? You know how people have answered this question in different cultures, religions around the world. Now let's start formulating your beliefs. And so they spend the year doing this. It's an amazing program. And then on a Sunday, which is coming up here, they're going to read their credos to the entire congregation on a Sunday morning, and we do a whole rite of passage. It's really a beautiful ceremony. But I bring this up because there's a couple of young people in this particular class who've been through some very, very traumatic life experiences, and to hear what they're saying about what they believe. I'm thinking of a couple of instances where it's very clear that they've come to a place where they see that the hardships that we go through and the challenges that we go through can become the fuel for us to make the world a better place. And it's just so heartwarming to see these young people, 13, 14, sometimes 15 years old, who already are seeing I mean, it's heartbreaking to see what they've been through, but to recognize that they found a church, maybe, and some of them already have, having gone through some issues with addiction and other things to try to get through what they've been through, and to find a place where they've got this very positive sense, worldview and sense of themselves in the world and their own empowerment of what they can do to make a difference. And so that they've turned this, what's happened to them, which was so traumatic, into something that they're going to use to make the world even better. So I just I love that program, and that's the kind of stuff we do. We even I'm doing a reimagining your theology class right now with adults as well on Wednesday nights. I have something coming up tomorrow night based on when we're having this conversation, and they end with writing a credo as well, and the adults love doing it just as much as the young people do, because our beliefs change and our worldviews change as we get older and get more experience.
What a grounding force to be able to start your life in that 9th grade, what, about 14 years old, at that age, getting the message that pain is our greatest teacher, and the ways that we are broken, actually, that's where the light shines in. I think to be in integrity in talking about God, we have to acknowledge the wrongdoings that have happened and the healing that must happen. I think there are so many people that are raised in religion that then question. I think there are so many more people now today that were never raised with religion that may feel a calling. A lot of the listeners of this show I would call seekers. They are seekers. And I think not everybody is a seeker. Really they're not. But when you have that seeking in your spirit, in your heart, in your humanity, we're going to wind up in places that we couldn't have imagined we could go. And I think a lot of my clients who do the healing work to recover, to find themselves, to grow into themselves, to give themselves permission. That's what I heard from your story. So much permission to find your own belief system, your own connection to what is spirituality, what is that energy that is bigger than ourselves. What is it? That great permission to self-define it, to have a personal relationship with it. For me, that was part of what was missing growing up with a strict religion. Can you explain to listeners who don't really know what a Unitarian church is, what it is, why it is, and why they're welcome?
Yeah, I think that the easiest way to do that is the biggest thing that differentiates a Unitarian Universalist church from almost any other religious body. I'm sure there may be others out there that I'm not aware of, but we are bound together as a community, not by a creed or a central belief, which would require a certain amount of conformity and everybody have to believe alike, which, whether you're in a Jewish community or different Christian communities or whatever, there's a creed, there's a statement of belief that says we are Jews because we believe this, or we are Christians or this kind of Christians because we believe this, or Muslims. In our congregations, we're not bound by a creed. So what does bind us together, people will ask, across all these differences? And it's a covenant. And so what we have and what we say every Sunday morning or whenever we gather together is our covenant, which is a promise, a sacred, I'll call it a sacred promise from my heart to yours within the community to say, this is how we're going to be together. And anybody who is willing to accept the covenant of the congregation, this agreement, they're welcome. So if they believe in God or they don't believe in God, or they believe in reincarnation after you die, or heaven, or that you just go back into the elements of the earth, any of those beliefs, those don't distinguish us as a community. So we have a lot of room for diversity and for people to explore and seek and find their religion or their religious ideas, let their conscience and their life experience guide them to have a connection to whatever that is that gives their life a sense of purpose and meaning and virtue and character. So that covenant concept. So our covenant, just so you can get a kind of a picture of what that is, it sounds very simple, but yet in many ways quite profound. We always start by saying love is the spirit of this church, or love is the spirit of this congregation, because it's really love at our heart. And then service is its law. So in the sense that we don't have a law like the Torah is not our law, the Quran, or no scripture is our law. The only law that we have, so to speak, is that we're going to live our lives in some way more than just for ourselves individually. So service is our law. That's the one thing that we agree, that love is at the heart of our community, and that service is one thing that we all agree is important, to live for something bigger than ourselves in the world. And then our covenant is to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. So if you can agree with those three things, seeking the truth in love, dwelling together in peace, and helping one another with this group of people, then you're welcome. And people come in with lots of different beliefs. People who have marriages or relationships that are, mixed, like my parents, it was a great place for them. They don't have to give up anything in order to be a part of this community. And so that's worked really well. The other piece I'll tell you is we have this expression, love beyond belief, here at All Souls. And the idea there is that love for us is more important than belief. Beliefs are great. Beliefs are important. They guide people's lives, and we all have different beliefs. But more important here, that's why we say love beyond belief, is love. And so our question is, yeah, you might have a different belief than me, but I want to know, how does your belief lead you to love, to be more loving, to know that you're lovable? Does your belief lead to more love in the world? And if so, that's kind of the test of belief. And so what we've realized over time is that people believe all kinds of different things. People believe one thing on Sunday morning and then go live their life a whole different way all the time. So what you believe or what you say you believe is one aspect, but it's not the most important. For us, it's how you act. How do you live? So if I'm hurt and on the side of the road and you see me and you're able to stop and help me, will you stop and help me? I want to know that you're that kind of person. And then I'll be curious, what beliefs led you to be that kind of person? But the beliefs are secondary to the love.
That sounds to me like the safety net to catch or to let fall through maybe righteousness, that without that connection to my beliefs need to bring me to love. If they're not bringing me to love, they're likely bringing me to my ego. They're bringing me to righteousness. And I think for so many people, that has been the historic turnoff of going to any church.
Right.
I'm from New Orleans, so a very Catholic town. Tulane, were you in New Orleans?
Oh yeah, 4 years.
Okay. For me, it was very hard to grow up in that city and see so much religious messaging and then go to a Mardi Gras parade and have someone flashing boobs, while everyone's around and, people are drinking and stumbling in the streets. The juxtaposition of the city of sin, basically, and all of this religion was so confusing for me. I hope in people listening to us, I hope that they can find some opening, if they're not already open, to explore in their own way. I think as a young person, I didn't feel a permission to find what resonated with me. And I think that's a very important piece. Your Unitarian Church, your description of how you welcome people, to me, is an honest defining of what diversity is. And I think we're entering a time where some kind of way, we've been talking about diversity so much that now we're actually dividing instead of coming together. Something is happening that feels very backwards or twisted. This division in our country is so opposite to the message of a Unitarian church. We're also living through quite the epidemic of loneliness, of separation, of people feeling empty, depressed, the highest rates of depression and addiction that we have ever really seen since we've been paying attention to statistics in the human condition. Can you tell me more about how, not just your church, but Unitarians kind of in general, how are they serving all of these issues within population and community? What are you seeing? What are you sensing?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're absolutely right about the state of things and the division. It seems like you either have options to conform to a particular way of being, or being open to diversity and a pluralistic society. And it seems like people are having to decide, or feel they have to decide. And so that there's politically, you have this division between those who think America, if you look at the white Christian nationalists who are saying America is meant for Europeans and white people, and that anyone who's coming in and trying to change the European values of this country are problematic. And then you have other people, like, I think people like ourselves and maybe most of your listeners, who say, no, America is a place where people have come from all over the world, and where we create community within our differences, despite our differences, and celebrating our differences, and that's what makes America unique. Mm-hmm. So there's these two very different ideas that are playing out politically right now. And I think in the religious world, there's also a kind of a similar thing. There are a lot of religions and religious people who think that we're going to find peace in this world once we convert everybody to our form of Christianity or our form of Islam, or whatever that is. That they think that we're always going to have problems until everybody is converted to whatever they believe. And then you have a congregation like ours, or over 1,000 Unitarian Universalist congregations around the country. And our belief is that no, the only way we're going to have peace and harmony in this, and unity in our society, is when we learn to accept one another and be in community across our differences. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, our congregations give us a chance to be a model of it, and to rehearse, week in and week out, how to be a pluralistic community with diverse people, and accept one another, respect one another, and have to work through the differences that come up, but in a way that's peaceful and loving rather than divisive and violent.
It's so interesting to hear you explain that, because from my lens, what you're naming is maturity. That you're really asking religion to mature into an acceptance. It's my belief that immaturity really struggles, very much struggles. Immaturity wants same, and very much struggles to allow and even enjoy difference. And I think maturity understands how to accept those differences, and immaturity doesn't.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, we talk about emotional intelligence, and
yes,
you could talk about spiritual maturity, these kinds of things. But it does seem that spiritual maturity across traditions and across cultures, people seem to be more comfortable with ambiguity. People seem to be more open to a certain amount of mystery, and be open to a certain amount of diversity, and asking questions rather than fighting against anything that might be an outlier or be different. So I do agree with you that it's about spiritual maturity. And someone said once that the problem with religion is that there's no quality control, that there's just all kinds of things out there. And how do you find a community, or know when you find a community how spiritually mature the leadership is, and whatever they're offering in terms of learning, resources, education, so that you can grow your own spirit in a way that is most helpful for you and for our world.
I'm grateful for you to name it with me, because I think a lot of people feel like it's some kind of dirty little secret that if you go seek out whatever you're seeking out. I'm a yoga teacher too. If you're seeking out a yoga studio or a religious place to worship or a meditation center, wherever you're going in your seeking, wherever your seeking takes you, you always have a right to observe, to evaluate the maturity level there. If that resonates with you, if someone has the maturity level that you want to learn from them, I don't very much want to learn from somebody that seems to be operating at a lower maturity level than I'm operating at. And it's okay to look at that. It's not so much a judgment. I think people are scared of judgment and self-development. It's more of a discernment. And you get to practice a very healthy discernment. And if your religious leaders can't hold up to that scrutiny, then that's not your place.
Right. And you said something earlier about the fact that people will that this isn't for everybody. That for example, I'll say, this church isn't for everybody. I'm not expecting everybody to become a Unitarian Universalist. I don't think that's what's going to make the world better. I think what I know is that our community is a place where a lot of us, our lives and our families have gained a lot of healing and nourishment and inspiration to live our lives in a way that is positive and helpful to society and helpful to our own personal growth. And so it's a great place for a lot of us, but I don't try to go out there and say, we're the one and only answer and you have to do it our way in order to be okay, or okay with God, or okay with the universe. So, I'm very clear that this is one way of being spiritual and being religious. And just to maybe it's worth saying that spirituality and religion, the way I would define them a little bit is spirituality I define as a personal thing. I have my spirituality, you have your spirituality. Religion is a corporate thing. It's something we do together. And so when I talk about our religious life, we have a lot of people on their own spiritual journeys that come together to create what we would call a religious community in our sense. Although people, because of the trauma and so much history, people have religion. Some people prefer to use different language. But the idea is that religion is about people living in community together. And hopefully, you can have religion without spirituality or without mature spirituality, and you can have spirituality without religion. But when they do come together, there is something really special to be able to be in a community that honors your spirit and gives you a chance to grow what we would call spiritually. And
that's what I want for people. I want them to know that they have a right to explore that growth their way. I mean, some of the most spiritual people I've known, like I think of my grandfather who never went to church. But if that man was on a boat with a fishing pole, like that was a spiritual moment for him. He was communing with nature. It was quiet. Sometimes that water was still like glass. It was like being with anyone's definition of God in that moment around you. And in my struggles with that word, what helped me get to being more comfortable with the idea of a God and the word God was in letting myself understand the energy. There is such a spiritual energy. I can see it in a baby's smile. I can feel it in how my husband first found you, like the little mysteries and magic of how we come together, how we trip over somebody in a moment where we really needed to hear what that person said, or we needed that hug that person gave. I've tripped over what I would call real life human angels in moments in my life where I bump into somebody's chair in a restaurant and they turn and just tell me something that I really needed to hear in a way that was beyond what was possible, just human to human in a regular old moment. The air shifted, the particles stop moving, and you know that you're just in the energy of spirit. And I want people to know that especially if they were harmed by someone that was using spirit, religion, God, whatever words you want to use, to manipulate or hurt. That wasn't spirit or God. That was a great manipulation. It really wasn't. And if you feel called to just explore without anyone forcing you into any kind of predetermined way that you need to be, you can absolutely discover a connection. And I think in these times of great loneliness and great depression and great addiction, we need connection. We need connection so much. And if you're starting from the ground up, that may be the love of a dog.
Mm-hmm.
There is an energy. That dog loves you on your best day, on your worst day. They do unconditional love in some ways better than humans do. That is an energy where you can start to see spirit. And that may be like a first step for someone that was abused or harmed in any kind of church. But part of what I teach is you are your own authority figure, because I help people come out of manipulation. Often online, religious people come after me because of that, because in a lot of religion, it's no. God is the truth. You are not the truth. But in our human form, I believe we very much have to hold on to that discernment. We have to, because not every human is operating in the light at all times. And we need that permission to stay centered, to stay with our own truth. And if something feels right to us, to go towards it. And if something feels wrong, to step away, to gain perspective, to ask for help. How do you receive that teaching from me that I teach people you are your own authority figure?
Yeah, I love it. That is exactly that. I think you articulated so beautifully, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I teach that in our foundations class, where we're introducing people that how authority in religious life has been, how it's been formed. So you have the early churches where it was all about the popes and all that have all the authority from God, and that they pass it down through the people. And then you have Protestantism came along and said, well, sometimes the popes and some of the ecclesiastical bodies, they're wrong because it's not in the Bible, and that the Bible should be, whatever it says in the Bible, that's what Christianity and religion is, and that's what God is. We know it all because of the Bible. And so they critiqued the church body based on what the Bible says. So we hear a lot of that in the United States. It's such a strong Protestant culture that if it's in the Bible, look, it's in the Bible. This is what God wants. This is what God says. Well, we took it to the next step in the Unitarian Universalist Church and said, no, it's not about what the ecclesiastical body said. It's not about what Scripture says. Ultimately, it has to be an individual using their life experience and their conscience to determine what is right and what is wrong, and the reason that we feel that it's important to do it in community is because an individual seeker on their own path, I know that I'm limited just based on who I am and my life experience, and just being a man, being a cisgendered male, I see the world in a particular way. Being an American, all kinds of aspects of who I am shape how I see the world. Mm-hmm. So when I do this, when I'm a seeker, but I'm in community with other seekers, I'm able to be shaped by the community, so that if I put something forward and someone says, well, Marlin, as a woman, let's just stick with that example. As a woman, when you say that, it means this to me, or this feels like it doesn't respect me fully, or something like that. That causes me to then go back and start thinking maybe a little bit deeper. And so for us, the idea of it is true that being an individual seeker on our own, outside of any sort of accountability or community of any way, it could lead you off on a path where you've made one little flaw in your thinking and you just keep going, and there's nobody there to kind of help shape you. So part of the diversity of our world and our country, I think what's important is to be humble and say, I only see things I have certain blinders of things I can't see, because, for example, I was never raised poor in Africa, going through certain life experience. So I don't know what that's like. And it's possible that as a fairly well-educated person raised in the United States of America, who's white identified, racialized, and all that I'm missing some things. So for us, it's important to be both an individual seeker with that conscience as our guide, but to do so in a community that can help us to make sure that our moral compass is shaped by the experience of other people. And so I go back to your wonderful example of your father, was it, or grandfather?
My grandfather.
Yeah. Your grandfather. So your grandfather. And so his spirituality sounds profound, and it was nurtured in nature and doing out on a boat doing the fishing. And I love fishing too, fly fishing. And so I know that spirituality and I love it. That's what I would say. That's spirituality. The religious component would be the community around that, so that some of us, I understand not everybody may need that or feel it's important to them, but for many of us, especially if we're raising kids or we're trying to get through a marriage or we're going through different life experiences, aging or whatever that is, it's helpful to have a community around us to do it with, and so when somebody dies or I end up in the hospital or someone I love is going through something really hard, to have a community around me who can support me through that is also a really important component for me. And that's why we try to provide these congregations that are open to free thinkers and seekers, but that also give us the elements of community that have been so important for all human civilizations.
I think it's important for everyone. And I can admit, I'm a pretty big introvert despite having a show. I am a pretty big loner, but I still need people. It's a belief that I have that we're all biologically wired to be social, certainly to different degrees. To me, human beings it's like we have rough edges. Mm-hmm. And when we bump up against each other, part of that is sandpapering off our rough edges. That socially, that's part of how we work as human beings. And so if we have too much isolation, it's like our edges don't get worn off by the friction that happens. And right. that friction, I think modern politics has made that friction a wrong, bad thing, as if we're not supposed to have that friction. Right. It's one of my struggles with the diversity conversations, because real diversity isn't just about me accepting. Mm-hmm. It's about me having the honor, the privilege, and the gratitude of being able to experience what is not mine. Right. And the way that teaches me and informs me and opens my mind and changes how I move through the world is its own spiritual experience. And so I think the acceptance language really misses that it's not just about acceptance, it's about experiencing some other kind or form of a culture. And the richness in that, the value in that, I think is so missed by so much of the bigger political, social media kind of conversation. And I think your definition of religion, I've never heard that definition of religion. I've heard the distinction between spirituality and the organized factors of religion, the rules, the you better follow the rules kind of quality of religion. But I really like how you put that there's spirituality, but then the religious part is what brings us together. And we do need that. That's part of what changes our perspective. It's part of what keeps us humble. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's absolutely right. And so I think what I just leave open that some people find community. I do believe we all need community. Some people do. It seems like, I don't know, because I'm not in relationship with too many, but I leave open the possibility that some people do find a supportive community and a diverse community without necessarily being part of a religious, what would be deemed a religious congregation. I'm not sure how exactly, but I know there's different configurations of community out there. So I just leave open. But I agree with you completely that we can't do this on our own. I sometimes tell the story of the Unabomber. I don't know if you remember him.
I do remember him.
Who was sent bombs and to these judges and politicians and stuff. And he was educated at Harvard. The guy was brilliant. I mean, genius. But he was living in a cabin all by himself, and he did this. His ethic led him to do this. Well, after they arrested him, they found a manifesto in his cabin that was a airtight, reasonable, rational, logical argument from start to finish that led him to send bombs to people. Yeah. And so the point is that, reason alone, if it starts with a wrong premise or it gets a wrong premise at some point, you can continue to play out a logical argument that can lead you to violence, but it's you're missing something. You've made an error, but you can't catch it because you have no one else reading your manifesto, so to speak. So I think that's a core example of how left alone, we can not only be lonely, but we can also veer off of living our fullest life of love and service and giving back.
Well, I'll take that example even further. I'm often telling very smart people that smarter people may need community more, but they may have the ability to talk themselves out of it more.
Right.
This might not be a politically correct thing to say, but it's part of why I grew up and have had a lot of experience with people with Down syndrome. Part of why they are the happiest people on earth is because they do not overthink. They allow things to be simple in a way that is beautiful. And it's why they're always smiling and they're not looking for stressors. Smart people have the propensity to think themselves into a hole. And that may be why smarter people may very much need the touchstone of connection. I think part of what was hard for me in Catholicism was, of course, the shame. Not very many religions have, like, we have Catholic shame. We don't have Jewish shame. Maybe we have Jewish guilt, but we have different things, right? And so when I would try to go a church route, I felt constantly the critical voice inside of me. I'm not doing it right. I'm not following the rules, the perfectionism. What I really like about how the Unitarianists, I guess that's the right way to say that, it's like each person is allowed to be themselves. So if I'm someone who maybe I want to go to a church once a month, maybe I go once a quarter, and that's enough for me, that's not frowned upon or shamed or shunned or, religious eye rolling kind of towards that. And there's no pressure to do more than what feels right to me. And I think a lot of sensitive people will identify with what I'm saying, that they would like to feel supported in the amount that they would like to take of an experience or of a thing or of a community.
Right. That's it. And so we don't have a bunch of rules and expectations for people. We hope that they will be involved in some way. If they join, that they'll find a way to show up once in a while and do the things that are both feeding them and giving back in the ways that they may be able to help others. But there's no restrictions or requirements in that way around people's involvement, because we really recognize that everybody who comes in is on their own spiritual path. And what we're trying to do is provide the resources for them to live their best life and to grow from where they are to wherever they need to be in their lives. And so it's the symbol of Unitarian Universalism is a chalice, which is the combination of a wine glass, if you will, a glass, or a cup and a flame. And the symbolism is that the cup represents community. If you think about in the Jewish tradition, they would pass the wine, share wine as part of the Shabbat service every week. And Christians obviously have the wine communion for symbol of communion. So the glass or the cup represents community, and the flame represents freedom. And so what we're trying to create is a community within which everybody has the freedom to find their path and follow their path that makes the most sense to them. And again, as a community, we're able to kind of help each other, polish each other's sharp edges, and support each other so that, obviously, if everybody's doing their own thing and there's no guiding principle like our covenant, it could maybe be chaos or something like that. But it works really well the way that we set it up. And some people come, like you said, every week. Some people come once a month or once a quarter or once or twice a year. But we're just glad when people come and people support our community.
Beautiful. So I have one more question I want to ask you, and it might just be a selfish question for me.
Hey.
You do a sermon weekly, I'm assuming.
Almost.
How do you decide, with all the issues out there in the world, all the people that you see, I know that you can see and look out and sense people in need, people in struggle, similar to me doing this show. That's why this might be a selfish question. What is your process of deciding what you're going to speak about?
For me, there's a few things that help guide. One of the things that I created when I came here 24 years ago was we created a set of theological themes, things like forgiveness and compassion and unity and diversity, things like that we use in a rotation over 3 years, so that if somebody comes into our congregation, maybe let's just say forgiveness, okay? And so we spend a month, and that sort of theme helps guide our programming, our education, my messages, so that and then 3 years later, we'll come back to that theme. And what's interesting is people who stay in the community, it becomes like a guidepost because of your growing, your spiritual growth, because 3 years later, someone remembers, gosh, I remember when we were dealing with that 3 years ago, and I was dealing with this thing with my mother or with my brother or at work. And now look where I am 3 years later. We can kind of look back and see whether we've grown and how different we are. And so I think of it as like a spiral. We're not just coming around in a circle, but we're hopefully continuing to go up, and grow as we go. And so these themes help guide me and guide our community and give us just a little bit. I don't want people to come in and I preached a sermon on forgiveness 5 years ago, and I felt like I got it out of my system. And then, they're part of the community for 5 years, and they never get to hear what I have to say on the theme, or never are forced in some way. Not forced, that's probably the wrong word, but given the opportunity to engage on that theme, which is so important for a healthy life, to learn how to grapple with the theme of forgiveness in our lives, because we all need it sometimes, and we all need to give it to others sometimes. So how do we do that? So those themes help. But the other thing is for me, is being in relationship. That I'm in relationship with this community and with a lot of different people, both here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where my congregation is, but also around the country and a few other countries who are involved in this community. And I just stay in conversation, and I just really get a sense of what are people thinking? What are people wrestling with? And then my own spiritual journey and what I'm wrestling with. Oftentimes people will come out of a sermon and say, "Oh, you spoke right like your husband said to me when he heard that message." And I always think, well, I'm just preaching to myself sometimes, and I'm glad other people are going through the same thing I'm going through. So it's all of that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to share with my audience?
A couple things that came up as we were talking that I didn't get a chance to say were, one is that a lot of young people who are raising kids, they'll come to me, or when I'm doing marriage counseling and they're talking about having kids someday, they often will say, I want to raise my kids without any kind of religion, so that they can decide for themselves when they become adults what they want to believe or what they believe. And what I try to explain, what I really believe, is that young people there's no way to raise kids religiously, spiritually neutral so that they become adults with completely an open mind. That basically either we as their parents or guardians help to shape their understanding of spiritual matters, or they're going to be shaped by movies and television and their neighbors and their grandparents and the kids on the playground. And so there's a lot of forces that are pushing different value systems on young people. And so what I explain is that what we try to do in our Sunday school is we're not indoctrinating kids in any particular dogma, because we don't have a doctrine or a dogma in that sense, but we are trying to introduce them to the major questions in life, things like forgiveness, like we were just talking about, and help them see how different people answer those questions in different cultures and different traditions, so that they really can learn how to think about these matters and how to feel into these matters, so that as they get older, they really can decide for themselves what do they really believe, because they actually know about how different people across time and cultures and religions have answered these big questions. So I think that if that's what the goal of a parent is to give their child an openness to decide for themselves someday, that the best way to do that is to be engaged in their spiritual development. And one of the ways would be to participate in a congregation like ours, where children are given that freedom and that information. And then the other thing that I thought of was this idea of this theologian who I studied when I was in seminary, James Luther Adams, he once said he was more concerned with idolatry than with atheism. And what he meant by that was that, because I say that because we have a whole service for people who don't believe in God at all, and so we have a service every Sunday for people. We call it our humanist service, or the point is what we call it, because we get right to the point without a lot of prayers or hymns or other kinds of theistic, God-centered elements. And so people will ask me, how do you have a service for people who don't believe in God? Or how can your congregation welcome people who don't believe in God and they don't understand? And so I explained what James Luther Adams said. He was more concerned with idolatry than atheism. And by that, he meant idolatry is worshiping something as God. I mean, actually worshiping it, actually making it central in their lives. That's not God, or not worthy of their sacrifice, not worthy of their life's direction and focus. And so if you think about that, there are a lot of people following ideas of God that, for me would be considered not worthy of that esteem. So if somebody's God thinks that all the Jews and all the people who don't believe like them are going to hell, or that God is going to torture people, or that women are less than men, or that gay and lesbian people are an abomination, there's all kinds of ideas about God that people worship a God, just like people used to worship a God that they thought slavery was okay and segregation was okay. I think there's lots of ideas of God that are not worthy of our sacrifice and the focus of our lives. That's idolatry. So he said, I'm more worried about people doing that, because that can create real harm and violence against people, and trauma and trauma. He said, whereas atheism, in his experience, and this is also my experience, is there are a lot of people who don't believe in God, or at least I'll say, tell me about the God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in that God either. And, because a lot of times it's that the only God they've ever been presented with is something they don't believe in, a man in the clouds, or somebody who's a kind of a cosmic peeping Tom who's watching over us all the time, everything we do.
Judging.
Right. So I don't believe in any of those gods either. Sometimes people think they're atheists, but it's just because they haven't explored the fullness of what it can mean to have a spiritual connection to a higher power. But my point is that the atheists, what my experience with atheists or people who don't believe in God is, they're oftentimes some of the most ethical and service-oriented people I know. Because they don't think that God created a perfect world and God's in charge and God's pulling all the strings. And they don't believe Jesus is coming back or someone else that's going to fix everything. So if we're going to have anything that resembles a heaven on earth, or we're going to end hunger or poverty or have peace, it requires us as people to actually get busy and try to create such a world. And so in that sense, I resonate with his thought that I'm more concerned about idolatry, people following a God, something as God that's not worthy, rather than people who may not believe in a God, but then because of that are out there trying to be a part of making the world a better place.
Those are very powerful points. I'm glad you got to share them. I mean, you are walking the walk of diversity. I have never before in my almost 44 years heard of a God-free sermon at a church. I couldn't agree with you more. I've met a lot of atheists that I thought, but you're very spiritual in how you do things. You just might not think of it that way.
I might just mention that if folks, a lot of the classes that I've been teaching, we've been doing them over Zoom. So people have been joining us from all over the United States and even from Holland and Africa and other countries. And so anybody's welcome. And you can find All Souls and some of our classes and of course our worship services and things online by going to allsoulschurch.org or www.allsoulschurch.org. And that's All Souls in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we're a Unitarian Universalist Church that's open to everybody. And we would welcome anybody taking part. We're also on Facebook. You can find us, and a lot of our classes and events are on Facebook. It's All Souls Church in Tulsa, All Souls Unitarian Church.
We will link to that also in the show notes so you guys can find it really, really easily. We will link to everything so you can connect. I want to thank you for sharing yourself, for coming on and chatting. I think for my listeners, this is going to be an episode that may either reaffirm their own spiritual journey or help them walk further down it. And I am very, very grateful to be able to bring you to my audience. Thank you so much.
Oh, what an honor. And it's just, if that happens for even one person, I'll be thrilled to be able to have that, any positive effect. And I love what you're doing. I hope you keep doing it and just continue to spread your love, because you just seem to exude such a positive, caring, compassionate spirit. And for me, it's just been a joy to be in conversation with you.
Oh, thank you so much. I very much try to do that. When I was a young woman, I thought I would grow up and have about 6 kids. I'm very maternal, and I have grown up and decided to be child-free, but I get to give those maternal vibes out. And I very much appreciate when people see that and receive that and allow me to be in the practice of my purpose. So
Yes.
Thank you for seeing me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank Dr. Reverend Marlin Lavanhar for being on the show today and having this discussion with me. You can learn more about him and his church by visiting allsoulschurch.org. I am an emotional badass. You are an emotional badass. And together, we are where Moxie meets mindful. Light and love, and I'll see you right here next time for a brand new episode. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.